Hello, college football fans. It's time for Urban's Take with yours truly, Tim May, and it's the special bowl season college football playoff Urban's Take. Urban Meyer, are you ready? Are you up for it?
Yeah, I think there's great matchups. This is a time where I remember even going back as an assistant coach. Bowl games are great for the players' families, and administrators. But I remember for the coach. It's not very much fun. I mean, it's actually awful at times. You're just working, and I remember one time sitting on an airplane, and we just had a big giant plane. I can't remember what it was, and we had a team and the administration and all that. And I remember looking out the window, and I saw they're loading the plane, and all these golf clubs being loaded up on the plane, and none of them were mine. They were all assistant ADs and boosters and all that. They're getting ready to go play some golf in nice warm weather.
Yeah.
And we're getting ready to go sit in a meeting room for 9 hours a day, trying to find a way to win a game.
Yeah, it's crazy. Hey, by the way, do you ever get, I would think the meeting rooms are sort of like makeshift, even if you're in the nicest hotel, right? Does it ever get comfortable in those meeting rooms? When you're used to the Woody Hayes Athletic Center or the facility y'all had in Florida, do you ever get comfortable in those rooms? You understand what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, well that's why I have a guy named Brian Voltolini. He's still there, and he was phenomenal.
Yeah.
He'd make it as much. I had Amy was our assistant, and Volt, and then Quinn Temple. That's where you see the value of those people. They're phenomenal, and they knew that we had a certain way of doing it, and their job was to make sure a coach and coaching staff, and most importantly the players, walked into that hotel and they were able to get into the routine as fast as possible.
Yeah.
And I would grade it an A+ over the 20 years or 18 years that I was a head coach. That was really, really important. And obviously our record was really good in bowl games, and that's there's a lot of people, a lot of hands on deck to make sure that those players are ready to go when the foot hits the ball.
Yeah, I think Voltolini, Volt as he's known, I think he's quite the facilitator. You know what I mean?
He's the best.
Make yeah, it's just amazing the hotels he finds sometimes. Of course, I wanted to ask you this real quick before we move into the college football playoff matchups in a quick fashion, and also a couple of bowl games to keep your eye on, and one not the least of which is Ohio State's. Um, is You don't miss it all, I'm thinking, because we've talked about this before, but Ryan Day and staff, for example, at Ohio State, were dealing with transfer portal, dealing with NIL, dealing with finalizing recruiting situations, dealing with getting their teams daubered back up for a bowl game after missing the college football playoff and losing to that team up north. Just in your mind, what kind of month do you think this has been for those guys?
Well, I've said this before, and for some reason there's getting very little traction out there. And I saw when the receiver that we got, the number one player in the country, or the top receiver,
Jeremiah Smith.
I saw that he said certain schools are throwing money at him. And yeah. I'm just trying to wait for the justification of the collective. When they hear the word collective, I'm going to say this again, that's cheating. Okay, and I'm not accusing Ohio State. I'm not accusing any other school of cheating, because it's somehow that they've wove that into saying that's part of the process. It says very clear in black and white, I looked it up again, that you're not allowed to use NIL for inducement of players. Yeah. NIL, in the purity of NIL, is fantastic. If a player wants to put stuff on Instagram, if he or she wants to use it, if Jermaine Otto in Ohio State or in Columbus wants to hire Marvin Harrison Jr. to help him sell cars and put his name on billboards, and that's called capitalism. That's great. But when you say, okay, we're going to get a bunch of boosters to put a big pot of money together, and I'm going to use this to get a player to come to a school, I'm still trying to figure. And there's not much conversation about that, and I keep waiting to hear because I hear the stories, and I know some of them are inflated, just because I know a lot of people still in the business.
Yeah,
but I know a lot of it's true. This player's getting offered this kind of money to go to that school, and I'm trying to think that you can't do that. And the NCAA, I know they're busy with other, investigations going on right now, but Tim, I'm curious. I mean, what does that mean? And move on. Move on to some other story, I guess. But what are we talking about? You can't do that.
it would take Urban, it would take a huge lasso to round up the culprits in this situation. And I think basically,
No, it really wouldn't. It would say the NCAA to come out and say that's illegal and stop doing it, and there's no more collectives. And if the player can go out and make millions of dollars like Marvin Harrison and CJ Stroud and some of these great players that, I think it's great. But to say, okay, I'm going to offer this guy, he's going to go to this school because they offered him this kind of money, and it's out there.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's out there.
And that's it.
Yeah.
So I hope we can do. Can we get an NCAA person on your show and say, what are you guys doing?
Yeah, I will endeavor to do that. Number one, and number two, it is what are you doing? But it's like you just said, it's hard to wrap your mind around what's going on, because it seems like half of it is hyperbole and or made up. You know what I mean? So we'll see where it goes. But clearly players are keeping in mind in recruiting, but definitely in the transfer portal, of what's out there from an NIL standpoint is being made. They're being made aware of it. Yeah.
Don't Tim.
I know.
We can't call it NIL. It's not. It's not name and likeness at all. It's pay for play.
Yeah.
So I'm going to refuse to use the word NIL, whatever the term NIL, because that's not what it is. I think NIL is fantastic. I think it's capitalism. It's what this country is built on. If you have earned the right to go earn millions of dollars on Instagram, on all that, that's in every sport, every athlete, the NCAA, that's none of your business.
Yeah.
If you want to sell your jersey for $600,000, you're allowed to do that. You want to sell your gold pen, I don't understand all that, but if you want to do that, that's yours.
Yeah.
But what you can't do, don't call it NIL anymore. It's called pay for play.
Yeah.
So let's get back to your original question. I've heard people say over the years, and I think it's, good conversation. It's not what happens, but when you go to a bowl game, you have one intent. And I think we mentioned it in the email you sent me. Are you trying to finish strong? Are you trying to build for next year? No, you're trying to win that game at all costs. Those players deserve to win a game. That coaching staff deserves to win the game, because maybe some people didn't take it quite as hard as we did, but you lose that game, you have trouble eating for the next 6 months because you have to deal with that darn loss.
Yeah.
So Devin Brown's got to play well and build for the future and all that, but don't make no mistake about it, those coaches and players go to work every day to find a way to win that game.
Yeah. Hey, let's jumping ahead, but that's okay with me. I like jumping ahead. Do you, just from what you've taken the temperature of Ohio State from afar, you obviously your son-in-law is a quarterback coach at Ohio State, et cetera, but do you feel like they've got a handle on this game? I mean, do you think going against a Missouri team that, like you and I talked about on a previous Urban's Take, Missouri wants to put a stamp on the end of its 2023 season for sure? You get that impression, but from talking to some of the Buckeyes last week, it seemed like they wanted to do exactly the same thing. Now that the dust has kind of settled from that third straight loss to the team up north, this could be a hell of a game, couldn't it?
It could be. Missouri's a great team.
Yeah.
I watched them. They have an incredible running back. They run the outside zone as good as anybody in the country. Very strong, physical. That center is really athletic. Good. They competed in the SEC and they won a lot of games. Really well coached team, but make no mistake about it, great players. And that was always a concern. I told Coach Day, and I watched when they beat Utah in the Rose Bowl a few years ago. That was one of the best coaching jobs I've seen.
Yeah. Because
that was Utah's Super Bowl, and Ohio State was still disappointed they didn't get in the playoff. Any questions about the quality of staff that Ohio State has, first of all, stop it. We lost to the team up north. Okay, move on, find a way to beat them next year. But excellent coaching staff, excellent players. I think they'll be very prepared to play. I understand that most of the guys are playing, that tells you about the culture that Coach Day has built at Ohio State. So this should be a heck of a game, but make no mistake now, Missouri is really, really good.
Hey, can I ask you something that just popped into my head before we move on? You remember in 2000, I think it was 2018, you guys, no, what year was it? No, I won't get into it. I've got my years mixed up, Urban. I'm 69 years old. You know how that goes, right? No, you don't. You're
No, I
59.
don't.
You're a young man. Uh, what factor stands out most when I say Michigan and Alabama, Michigan versus Alabama, or as you call it, the team up north versus Alabama? What factor stands out most about this game?
Alabama early in the year was not the Alabama that I remember watching and coaching against. However, excellent staff, one of the best rosters in college football. They benched the quarterback, who is Percy Harvin slash Curtis Samuel slash,
Jalen Hurts.
Reggie Bush playing
Yeah.
quarterback. I mean, he's that good. This will be a line of scrimmage game, which the Wolverines are really good at. And I think this is a great. I was hoping this would be the matchup. I'm really looking forward to watching this game because it's two really good teams and they're two strength on strength. So I think no row will be a big difference in that game.
You know what's funny? I know it's totally different circumstances, and the quarterback situation is totally different. But this, in many ways, reminds me of 2014 Ohio State after it loses that game to Virginia Tech. You remember that? You were the head coach, and then y'all run it off, and you have to make an impressive performance in the bowl game to get to the college football playoff. But y'all were a team on the rise, even though you were finally playing your third string quarterback based on the way the preseason started in Cardale Jones. But y'all were the hot team. I mean, in Alabama, y'all took on Alabama, number 1 seed. Y'all were number 4, and you beat Alabama. And it's funny, Alabama's now in that role, but there is something to be said about momentum at the end of a year, right? That because it looks like Michigan doesn't seem like the same team it was about 4 or 5 games ago, just to me. Now it's been a while since they played, clearly, and some things can get straightened out, but there is a certain sense about having some momentum, right?
There is, and Alabama's got all the momentum in the world, But you do forget that Auburn gave up a 27-yard pass, a 31-yard pass.
31, yeah.
Last play of the game. So the world is a lot different right now with that defensive back. I mean, just tackle the receiver.
Yeah.
Or just take a guy and do something other than what happened because the game's over.
Yeah.
So Alabama's got a lot of momentum, but so the Wolverines. They went through a coaching suspension, which is still hard to fathom. They went and they, beat Ohio State, which it pains me to say that, but they beat Ohio State and Ann Arbor and played very well that day. But it was a very close game and could have went either way. And then the Big Ten championship, I was at the game and they didn't look on point. I don't want to take anything away from Iowa, but Iowa's defense was dominant in that game. So I think you got enough time between that game and the Big Ten championship game and the Rose Bowl that's coming up that you'll see two very good. These teams will be ready to go. They're going to be healthy and fresh. They're two well-coached teams. I'm looking forward to watching.
Yeah. Plus, Michigan's got the notice of allegations on a previous investigation that are hanging out there now. And who knows when the next ones are coming? But that's an Urban's take for another day, ladies and gentlemen. What factor stands out most about Washington versus Texas? I've got my idea, but I don't want to interrupt you. I'll chime in after you give yours. But man, this could be a hell of a game. Go ahead.
It's another great matchup, and Texas is the best-looking team on the hoof in college football. I stood next to them. Coach Sarkisian invited us to practice. We watched them. The defensive front at Texas is the best looking and I think the best in college football. So I'm not picking Texas to win it all because I'm not going to do that on your show. I just can't. But Texas is really good. But Penix, my gosh, think about that. That guy was in Bloomington, Indiana, and the coach of the year at the board was in Indiana, in the Hoosier State. I mean, in the Big Ten. And now they're competing for national champion in Seattle. So I like Texas in that one. I think it's going to be a great game. I'm telling you, Texas, every position. And I did that because we covered them in the game. And I went through each position. And every one of them have NFL players.
Yeah.
Every certainly on offense and defense, but every position will be making money in the National Football League in the next 2 years.
Yeah. and two big-time quarterbacks, in my opinion. Michael Penix Jr., he was my number one vote for the Heisman Trophy just because I like what he did. I liked how he was so much a part of that team's big-time turnaround, so huge a factor, and he put up the stats, and like you were talking about, I mean, Quinn Ewers, oh my goodness, even I, who's gotten into games for free all my life, I'd pay money to go see that one. I just like it when two big time quarterbacks are going at each other. But I think you touched on it. Everybody looks at Texas and they see Sarkisian and they see this great offensive scheme and the way he can scheme guys open against those defenses. But Texas has got some real dudes up front on defense, and they haven't had that in the last many years, up until the last, year or two. And I think you're right about that. I mean, but what stands out to me about Washington is second time around, they weren't supposed to beat Oregon. Oregon should have beaten them the first time, right? They figured out a way to do it. And Michael Penix Jr. was a huge part of that, but so was the Washington defense. It's funny how you find a team on this journey of a season, right?
Yeah, it's the locker room. And a coach once said, and it stuck with me, a team that won't be beat can't be beat.
Yeah.
And it's one of those, Washington is that team this year. I think TCU was that team last year where the strength of that team is that locker room. To beat Oregon twice in a year, I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's impossible. I mean, they must, and I spoke to the coach briefly, but there must be something. I don't know. That's one of the four teams I haven't watched the least, but I have watched them. Because I kept hearing their defense is not very good, and it's just about Penix and all. It's not. No. They're an excellent team.
Yeah,
they're and top to bottom excellent team, and they're one of those teams that will not be beat. And those are the teams. Our 14 Buckeye team was that way. Cardell Jones goes in at quarterback, and then our defense plays better. Yeah. Cardell Jones goes at quarterback, and Zeke Elliott runs for 3 straight 200+ yards games in the stretch run there. So. Yeah. Washington is a team that won't be beat.
Yeah. We ought to come up with the Meyer Trophy, to award to the guy after the bowl games and the playoffs who should have won the Heisman. You know what I mean? Because you would have started with Zeke Elliott, wouldn't you?
Sure.
Yeah.
And then, that Joe Bosa should have been in New York too.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, last thing. You remember recruiting, right? And we were talking about it earlier. And but I wanted to ask you this. When you do go toe-to-toe, like Ryan Day and his staff did for the number one player in the country in Jeremiah Smith, and they get him to somehow or another, he sticks to his commitment they had made to Ohio State. And then Edric Houston, this defensive lineman, picked up defensive lineman out of Buford, Georgia, who ends up sticking to his commitment to Ohio State, even though Alabama made a huge press for him in the end. What does that do for a staff, Urban, when you hang on to a class like that?
Well, the world, not just football, but the world is about momentum. And I remember the day we got Raekwon McMillan and Von Bell.
Yeah.
That to me changed really the trajectory of Ohio State recruiting, is when you could, because Ohio State's always recruited all over, but you would only really get someone that was connected somehow to, for you to go into Georgia and beat Georgia on a Georgia kid.
Yeah.
That was really hard to do. And I think our real life Wednesdays back then, I'm not sure that's as big a deal now because that's NIL is taken over.
Yeah.
But to go get someone that, I mean, they wanted, to go into Florida, to go into Georgia, when we went into Texas, and you take Baron Browning, J.K. Dobbins, Okuda, that really changed the trajectory of Ohio State recruiting, because in the past, Ohio State got great players, but a lot of times they got people that had connections, and they had some great gets. But for those guys to hold on to the commitments, and I did read the stories once again, how much is that inflated? But for the Buckeyes to hold on to those two, and you said, what does that do for the staff? You can enjoy, you're on to the next. But I'll tell you what, if you lose those guys, that just rips your heart out, and you have to somehow pick yourself back up off the mat. Hey,
one bonus question for you before I get out of here, because I want to ask you about this guy's one of my favorite coaches that's ever been at Ohio State. I think he helped in that turnaround big time, 2014 and on. A lot of people have been taking shots at this guy because of his age. I'm talking about Larry Johnson. Can you put into words how good a coach and person Larry Johnson is?
we got him in 2013. I remember we were at the convention and we lost Mike Vrabel to the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you lose a coach like Mike Vrabel, you better replace him with someone. And, you know, I heard some rumblings. This is when Penn State was going through their transition, and I recruited against Larry Johnson for years. And I mean, he was arguably the best recruiter, certainly in that area of the country, and a defensive line coach. So one of the best coaches I've ever been around. The players, it's like a cult. You know, they just, every word that he says, they live on it. He's the best pass rush teacher I've ever seen as far as the hands and the way he works. So he's a gem for Ohio State.
Yeah. Urban Meyer, Urban's take. What would be the last thing before we go? What would be the last thing you would, Ryan Day, if dude, the Newt Rockne speeches actually do work, what would be the last thing you'd tell Ryan Day to tell his Ohio State football team about putting the positive spin on a 2023 season? You know, a disappointing 11-1 season. That's hard for me to.
I get you, you know, but it just lacks. Well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, everybody puts so much emphasis on that game.
Yeah.
But 11-1, I mean, you guys played your ass off. You know, find a way to get to, 12-1. Find a way to get to 12-1, and I'll tell you, I'd empty all the barrels on Missouri. Everything you possibly can do, and I know they are.
Yeah.
I mean, this is going to be a huge game. It's in a great stadium, the Cotton Bowl. It's in a great city, Dallas. It's going to be the biggest show on that evening. Empty the barrels, man. I mean, find a way to go win this game. You got a new quarterback that's an athlete back there. Do as much spread offense as you can. Let that kid run. Let that kid play. And empty the barrels, because Missouri's this will be, I'm sure the coach there and the players, if they find a way to get this one, this will be one of the biggest wins in Missouri's history.
Absolutely. They've only beaten Ohio State one time. They're 10-1 against Ohio State. I saw that game. It was one of the second or third games I ever saw in Ohio Stadium. I was a student, and Pete Woods with that drive, and then they go for two, and they made it. I mean, that's what it took. But Missouri's going to be up for this one big time. Hey, Urban, appreciate it. Hey, we're going to come back one more time before the national championship game just to kind of get your feel, man. But one more Urban's take this season. Are you up for it?
I am.
All right.
Good to be with you, Tim.
Happy holidays, my man. And ladies and gentlemen, that's Urban's take. We'll see you next time.